right, so welcome everybody. So happy to see you. Today you are going to hear from Amanda Castañeda, Shumla Archaeology Director, there and back again, an archaeologist tale, which I find very silly and funny because she is nearly 6 foot tall, at least in comparison to me. So there is there's nothing of the Hobbit about Amanda, except for her many journeys through the wilds, and she will be telling all about that. And I'm just so excited that you have the opportunity to get to know her today. She is such a value to Shumla. She brings so much important Shumla institutional knowledge, but also so much experience in the world of archaeology in other parts of the country and internationally. And so we're thrilled to have her. And since this is really about her introducing herself, I'm not going to tell you more about her specific credentials. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So Amanda, take it away.
Cool. Thank you so much, Jessica.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is for those of you who are stalwart luncheon learners, this is going to be sort of a different take. It's going to be sort of an abridged version of at least the last 6 years of my career. It's really just as much just to get to know me, and there will be a little bit more silliness involved in this presentation, but I promise not a lot. And I will try to make it as exciting as possible with as many rock art photos as possible, but very few will be from the Lower Pecos. I'm going to start with a really brief background on sort of how I got to this point. So my first brush with Shumla was actually in 2009. I was an undergraduate student at Texas State University in San Marcos, where I'm sitting today. And I needed a field school. I was an anthropology major, and I saw that this place in West Texas, Shumla, was offering a mini Maymester, a field methods and rock art 3-week intensive course. So I went out there, and it's safe to say I was immediately hooked. Within those 3 weeks, I knew I have to get back out here. So I went back, finished my last year of undergraduate, and then I applied for an internship with Shumla. And that's when I joined the team and stayed on as an archaeologist for about 3 years for the Lower Pecos Rock Art Recording and Preservation Project. And this project was sort of Shumla's first large-scale, in-depth focused documentation effort. So it was really neat to be there from those early days. A lot of that stuff we still use today, and a lot of that stuff we now need to update today. So hopefully I can be helpful to the team in explaining well, this is why we did it, but that doesn't mean it can't change. After those 3 years, though, out in Comstock, I felt ready for grad school. So I went back to Texas State. That experience at Shumla with LPRARP, it's a really hard acronym, but the Lower Pecos Rock Art Recording and Preservation Project, that really empowered me into graduate school. I felt comfortable with research design. I felt comfortable with project execution, with dissemination of results. And so I came back. I think it surprised everyone, especially Carolyn, when I said, I don't think I want to do rock art for my thesis. I really want to challenge myself and learn something different. And throughout all this time of going around the Lower Pecos, these different rock shelters, I had seen hundreds upon hundreds of bedrock mortars. And so that was something I loved cooking. I wanted to know more about. And so I did my thesis on groundstone technology. Staying at Texas State for a little while longer, but still working in the Lower Pecos. I worked for the Ancient Southwest Texas Project, which was a long-term research project under the direction of Dr. Steve Black, who was my master's advisor. We worked at multiple sites across Valverde County with our biggest excavation at Eagle Cave. So all throughout this time during grad school, I still was coming out to Comstock, keeping a foot in the Lower Pecos, and I knew that I wanted to stay there. So after that time, I was very fortunate to join the first crew of the Alexandria Project. I literally refer to this in my life as the Alexandria years, because it was just such a transformative project for myself. If you're not familiar with this project, this was a 4-year endeavor that Shumla undertook to try to complete baseline documentation at the over 300 known rock art sites in Valverde County. There are many more that we don't know of yet. And this sort of opened my eyes, when you're going to 10 plus rock art sites in a month and every single one of them different, you really get to see the variety of just even within Pecos River style, or maybe see things that you're like, well, that doesn't really fit any of our known styles. And so that was really neat. So I helped with the first, I think like 135 or so of those sites. But then in 2019, my husband Charles, who's on the left side of that photo, he wanted to go for his PhD. So that took us to the Northern Plains. And that's where we're going to spend most of this presentation. Um, Archaeology is so much of who you know and your network. And Mark Willis, which many of y'all have probably heard his name before, works with us in Texas. He was working with people in Wyoming. Larry Lohendorf, who's on this call, and Mary Hopkins, who was the Wyoming SHPO at the time. And he said, there's this project going on up there and they want someone who can record or describe rock art. Do you think you'd be interested? And I said, well, I think I can do that. Yeah. And so I got a job with the SHPO office. I was positioned in their cultural records office, which is in Laramie, at the University of Wyoming, which is really neat. And most of the time I did sort of GIS work, georeferencing, data quality, site records management, that kind of stuff. If you know me, my I guess second love to archaeology, most importantly, I got to do a lot of fishing. So I said a little silliness in here. But really, the thing that I think was one of my best experiences in Wyoming was I had the opportunity to write a nomination for a rock art district to the National Register of Historic Places. This was that project that Mark got me in on. And so I worked with Dr. Larry Lohendorf and his nonprofit Sacred Sites Research. Pretty much all of the sites that you're going to see on this talk was through Larry. So Larry, I know you're out there. I'm really indebted to you for giving me these opportunities. But so this particular rock art district, it was a cluster of 4 sites along the middle fork of the Powder River, which you can see. This is a photo of the area right down here. So just absolutely stunning, really gorgeous area. And when I was thinking about this lunch and learn talk, I was talking with Emil, and he said, is there anything that you saw during your travels that really reminded you of the Lower Pecos or made you think of the Lower Pecos? And the short answer to that is no. But this was my first big project after I moved to Wyoming. I mean, I moved in May of 2019, and I was in the field at these sites in July of 2019. And so throughout this time, I couldn't help but constantly be thinking about the Lower Pecos and be drawing comparisons or saying like, well, that's really different to where I'm used to working. And so I want to spend at least the first part of this presentation talking about this project and just sort of introducing you to it. It's a really great area. So I'm going to start with this panel in particular. So this is the middle fork of the Powder River, is just below the vegetation here. And this scaffolding, this is 2 levels of scaffolding that Lori and her daughter Maya are standing on. So at least 3 meters above the ground, probably. I was used to high panels. I had seen high panels in the Lower Pecos before. I guess I should point out, you might be able to see some of the paint just above Maya's head there. And people would always ask on tours and things, for these high panels in the Lower Pecos, like, how did people get up there? Was the ground higher? We heard that question quite a bit. In the Lower Pecos, the answer to that is oftentimes, most times, no. If some of you can think of sites such as Panther Cave, where you have figures that start at eye level for their feet, and then they go up 2 meters above that for their heads and their paraphernalia. You're not doing those types of murals without some sort of scaffolding. And so when I showed up here, that was my first thought, was like, oh, of course, yeah, I'm used to the idea of building scaffolding to accomplish some of these things. But that was actually incorrect in this location. And actually, I think Larry and Julie and Mark just recently published in Plains Anthropologist their geoarchaeological study of this area. It's a much more dynamic canyon. There's been a lot of terrace, a gradation, and then erosion. I'll point out, so if you notice this line here in the sandstone, where this area below it is much more eroded, a lot more attrition here. all of this is really showing just the dynamic nature of that sort of terrace building and then moving away and parts of the sandstone coming off with it. So in this instance, it probably wasn't scaffolding. The ground surface probably was that much higher at the time of when these paintings were put down. So showing a close-up, this is that same panel that Lori and Maya were working on. It's complex, it's really busy. You've got multiple different colors, greens, whites, tans, reds, even some sort of grayish colors. There's a couple human hand stencils. This particular figure here that's kind of called out by D-Stretch is sort of anthropomorphic, but it's also a little bit odd. It's got really big feet that we equated to sort of like bear paws, little ears, it's got big arms. Right next to it is the namesake of the panel, the green bear panel. So you have, again, I'll kind of point out, large snout, little ears, a little hump, probably a grizzly bear, possibly a grizzly bear, a front paw with some claws, and then a long tail, which maybe you haven't seen very many bears in Texas, but they typically don't have long tails. But as Larry soon explained to me, the long-tailed bear is actually quite common in a lot of stories and mythology for many indigenous groups up there. So that was really interesting to see. But this felt sort of familiar to me. I had just come from the Lower Pecos where you had polychrome, complex murals, interweaving of figures. And so this to me was like, yeah, okay, I'm really comfortable with this. Although I found out quickly that this type of panel was abnormal for Wyoming. It was sort of very interesting and unique, which was part of why we were wanted to do the nomination to the NRHP. So that was sort of interesting. But bear imagery was really common at these sites. So here's a set of kind of free-floating paws. They're in kind of poor condition, but the D-stretch down here, you can see the green band of like where the wrist would be, and then the white of the paw, and then the claws, and the one on the right is a little better preserved. This is my favorite example of some of the bears that we worked with up here. When we were documenting this panel, we could see things were here, but we couldn't quite figure it out exactly what was going on. We could see two divots here. We could see incisings here. But truly, at the time when we were filling out the form and taking photographs, we couldn't make heads or tails of anything. It was on the very last day. We were cleaning up the site. We were walking back and forth, just making sure we picked up everything. And the lighting was just perfect to illuminate this grizzly bear. So I'm going to add in the illustration. And you can see it pretty okay, I'll take away, without the illustration added, because we immediately started taking photos with that really good lighting. But truly before that, you couldn't see anything. So here again, you have the hump of the bear goes up. It's poor preserved back here. Little ears, they peck the eyes, added incisions for the teeth. The claws are pretty prominent. And then interestingly, they also pecked just little bands just right by the paws, which if you think back to the last slide, it had the green at the wrist before it had the paw and the claw. Here's that side by side, just a de-stretched or enhanced version rather, that you really can see the claws better, the eyes stick out. It was interesting because in the Lower Pecos, I was used to feline sort of being the main kind of powerful animal, predator type animal that was shown. But I really didn't see many felines on the Northern Plains. It really was the grizzly bear that was sort of the main symbol for strength and power. But again, those bands, because I was just working the Lower Pecos right before this, these bands on the feet, they're little peck marks that go across the paw, really caught my eye. And a large part of that, I added some, there you go. A large part of that was because right before I had left Val Verde County, we worked at a site called Frost Cats or Frost Felines. And so it's these two feline anthropomorphic type creatures that are facing each other. They have speech breath, but they also had these black coloration on the wrists, or we called them bracelets at the time just because we didn't know what to call them. But that caught our eye because we knew of a prominent feline at Curly-tailed Panther, another site very far away, that also had these black bracelets or bangles right before the paw. So that was just, I mean, again, at the time, I had just started working in Wyoming, and my only frame of reference for anything was Lower Pecos stuff. I still won't hazard a guess as to why you have that similarity. I need to talk to my colleague, Dr. Rolone, who studies the felines. But that was really neat. The biggest thing that struck me about these sites when I was working there is that there's just an impressive variety of imagery, of styles, of time periods, of the way things are executed. It's very different than the Lower Pecos. So here's an example of some of the hand stencils, right? So these are, a lot of them even include the arms or the wrists and the forearms. Underneath this, you can't see it in the photo, but there's a lot of finely scratched designs as well. Here's another panel from the same set of sites. Here you have more sort of geometric, you have incised, you have fully pecked figures as well, a little bit of paint. We also had a couple panels with shield-bearing warriors, which is a very prominent figure type on the plains. So we really just had this like huge plethora of different, probably groups represented by their painting. One more, and then we have this sort of a braided grizzly bear. Again, it is a male grizzly bear, and a figure riding it on the back, perhaps taming it, taking its power with a spear going into its back, and that's sort of scratched and incised. And this to me was so different because in Val Verde County, that would be like having one canyon that has 4 rock shelters right next to each other that had 6 different styles of rock art, both petroglyph and pictograph, from 8 different time periods. And we just don't see that in Val Verde County. So this was really just totally different from what I have known. Because of this variety, some of the imagery was more easily connected to living peoples today. It was more recent. It's more closely tied to the stories that are still told by the descendants. So before I had started with this project, Dr. Larry Lohendorf had already made a lot of connections with some of the imagery at Wold to the Absalogay, or the crow. So this image on the left is from the Wold sites. So it's really finely scratched, and it's a sort of structure with the head on top, big eyes, ears, and a headdress. And he drew a likeness to a pretty well-known, some of the most well-known characters in Crow mythology, which are the twins, the Crow's version of the twins, Spring Boy and Lodge Boy. And you can see Spring Boy and Lodge Boy are shown in other mediums as well, like on the shield at other rock art sites. And so that was something that was like, wow, this is really interesting. But it's still the same type of methods that we use here in the Lower Pecos, especially Carolyn, looking at the different attributes of these characters and what makes that character that one, and then looking at the stories and the mythology and finding those connections. But we were lucky to also have so Aaron Bryn, who's now the Crow Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. He came out at the time when I was there, and he immediately kind of keyed in on this panel as we were going through this panel, especially for me. Larry probably already had thoughts, but for me, it didn't strike me in any particular way. It has some zoomorphs, has probably this elk. It has this interesting bear, and other lots of meandering lines. I'm going to zoom in on this bear area. And so, but Aaron, he took one look at this panel and he said, oh, well, I think that's the bear song dance. And of course, Larry immediately knew what Aaron was talking about. I still needed to be educated. But Aaron was describing this ceremony of essentially you would gather everyone around, you would have the participants or the dancers gather in a teepee before the ceremony, and then they would come out along a pathway, and they would interact with this bear pelt that was attached to a tree. And when they would interact with this bear pelt, they would then vomit or regurgitate different items that showed their indwelling spirits. And so for me, what I thought was just like a really odd bear shown in profile, all of a sudden took on a whole new meaning. And it just like was really amazing. And Aaron, let us know there was one photograph of this particular ceremony, or at least the only known photograph of this particular ceremony. And this is from a book, Blankets and Moccasins, Pliny Coup and His People. And you can see in the background the big grizzly bear pelt on the tree attached to it. All the people are gathered, and then you see one of the participants who is regurgitating his indwelling spirit. So that was something that was really special for me to be able to participate in this research and see these connections. Now, one important thing I want to talk about before we move on to some other sites is the location of this site. So the Wold, or these four sites rather. The Wold is located at sort of at the southern end of the Bighorn Mountains. So if you're looking at the map of Wyoming, right about here. And it's situated near this prominent, they call it a hogback, or think of it as like a large ridge. And it's called the Red Wall locally. So it's on the satellite imagery, this long orange-red formation. And it runs almost continuously for about like over 20 miles, right? So it's pretty long. If you've never been out there, it's really worth the visit. It is this brilliant red sandstone. It's called the Chugwater sandstone, and it creates a really striking landscape. But more importantly than its beauty, for the purposes of this conversation, is that the Red Wall is basically impassable, except for a handful of passageways that are associated with rivers or streams coming through them. So if you're trying to get from the plains to the Bighorns or vice versa, in this particular area, you really only have a couple of options. So to show that on the map, the yellow line is the Middle Fork of the Powder River. This is where the Wold Rock Art District is. You have Beaver Creek that's pretty close. There's also rock art on this drainage as well. But then beyond those two passageways, it's 11 kilometers to the north and over 22 kilometers to the south until you can find the next viable route. And so you can imagine if you're traveling across this landscape, it's really important to know where those different routes are, to pass on that cultural knowledge, perhaps to make markings, it's basically saying like, yeah, this is where you need to be. And so the variety of the rock art for perhaps millennia makes a lot more sense there. And for me, this was very different. The Lower Pecos landscape, in my view now, is much more sort of homogeneous, which seems weird to say because it's this vast system of canyonlands and really unique places. But compared to the plains where you have big mountains, big valleys, other kind of large freestanding formations, in the Lower Pecos, you have a lot of different canyons that could take you to the uplands or back down to the river. That doesn't make canyons and shelters any less important, but I think it makes us as archaeologists have to shift our ideas and have a different perspective about the landscape. And we have to look at other things as to, well, why was it important that this site was put right here? As opposed to something that's maybe a little bit more sort of like obvious of like, oh, okay, this is the only place that you can really get through for quite a while. And so it makes it a very important place, a very salient place. So, okay, so I'm going to stop talking about Wold. I want to spend the next little bit just really showing examples of some of the sites that I worked at with Larry and his team over the last 6 years. This one, I think right after Wold in like August, we went up to this particular site. And this was an adventure. You might be able to see that I'm in a harness and roped in. So Larry, when he was asking Charles and I about going, he said, well, how comfortable are you with climbing? And I was like, well, I've never done it, but I'll give it a shot. And I almost didn't do it, but I'm glad I did. But I'm standing next to the panel here, and this is the illustration of it, done by Greg White. And again, it sort of was familiar for me. You had this large anthropomorph that also has animal characteristics. This one is more equated with a bison, so it has horns, has hooves on the ends of the arms as well as the feet, although not as well preserved, and then a buffalo behind it. So again, this was familiar. And here's just a D stretch. So this was a really, really neat site. I was very glad that Larry encouraged me to to climb up, and then rappelling down was honestly harder for me than climbing up, I think. It's really just trusting that you can sit off of the cliff and not fall. But despite this familiarity, I think the very next day, Larry took me to another site in Montana. And this site was almost entirely petroglyphs, all pretty lightly incised to almost barely scratched. So this was something that really took a keen eye, and the correct lighting. You could very easily miss stuff if the lighting wasn't in the right spot. And so this was also a different type of documentation method than I had been doing at Shumla. I was back to doing in-field illustrations, which was what I did at the 2009 field school, but I hadn't done for a really long time at this point. And so because photographs really don't capture these very lightly incised figures very well, we pretty much had to do measured drawings in the field where we could really get close, take a good look, and then we would render those later into digital illustrations with the help of photographs and our in-field drawing. So that was a lot of fun. I did a little bit of work in Utah. This was a great site near the Wyoming border. If you're familiar with the Flaming Gorge area, again, these large anthropomorphs just seem to be following me everywhere. It's like the Lower Pecos was constantly just on my mind saying, come back. And we worked with a really great group of volunteers at this particular site. Many of them were from the Utah Rock Art Research Association. I would say one of the best things about doing these projects was meeting so many wonderful people and also growing my community. Rock art, the rock art community is a wonderful one, and there's so many varied types of people. And but even as large as it is, it's still archaeology is still quite small. And so I would always be meeting people who had either come down to the Lower Pecos or knew somebody I knew, and that was really a great part of this. Going a little bit further south still, I worked on a contract project again with Larry, recording rock art in New Mexico. And so here, my colleague Tim Graves and I, we were trying to find the location of where this petroglyph was. We knew it was at this site. We had found other ones along the rock, but this one seemed to be missing, and this was one we were really interested in. So we eventually did find it. Let's see. It just was mostly buried. So the only portions that we could see of this petroglyph is just this uppermost, whatever this element is, and then the sort of the edge of the headdress right here. And you can see the pecking is pretty sparse. It's pretty faint, but we felt pretty confident this was it. We had some other pecking that wasn't necessarily in the original illustration, but that's okay. So we ended up digging out this area, and then the resulting illustration done by Dave Kaiser revealed this really great Jornada Mogollon face figure. And then Mark Willis did put the digital rendering back onto the rock. And it just, what wasn't clear from that original illustration, I'll go back for a second, they just showed the mouth as this dark band, right? But it wasn't necessarily clear of what that was. So it was really great to uncover it and see, oh, the mouth is actually an incorporation. So the artist incorporated a natural chert seam into the image to make it create the mouth. So incorporation, it occurs in Lower Pecos, it occurs in Mexico. I can safely say I've seen incorporation pretty much at every single site I've worked at. So still that intimate tie between the land, the surface that the imagery is on, and the image itself. Ooh. Ah, sorry about that. Just one more example of one of the New Mexico sites. This is on that same project. Some of you might be able to see up here near where Juan is. I'm going to circle it with my pointer. Are these two concentric circles right next to one another? If you're familiar with Jornada rock imagery, it could be sort of a goggle eye, but just the eyes, nothing else was left over. But this was rock art. projects are always an adventure. Again, the ground surface could have been a little bit higher, but at this point, well, we had to get Juan up on a ladder and get him out there. And then the last project I want to touch on from my time in Wyoming is a site called Greybull South. This is a very typical rock art site setting for Wyoming. This big, long sandstone exposure or cliff nearby a river. The Greybull River is somewhere over here. This is a photo of that site, of the Greybull South site from the 50s. And you can see there's quite a bit of pecked imagery. So this is a shield-bearing warrior. I mentioned that term earlier. There's bear paws. There's all kinds of interesting things. But there's also pecked, incised, and scratched image, or I'm sorry, incised and scratched imagery as well. You just can't see it in the photograph. But this site has a sort of unfortunate history behind it. So in the 60s, the director of the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody decided that they should try to remove some of the block or some of the rock art from this site in order to protect it because they thought it might be inundated by water. And so while the intention was well-meaning, obviously this is not a practice that we would ever do today. And so they did indeed remove several blocks from this site. So here's some comparisons from the 50s photographs. So this large quadruped figure was taken out. And then we have several more shield-bearing warriors and things that were taken out as well. But happily for us, I guess, when we arrived in 2019, there was an ongoing project of trying to document these extant blocks. They were found in the museum, I think in like a shed. And so it was like, okay, we should really try to digitally document these, do 3D modeling so we could at least digitally put them back in place. And so my husband, Charles, took the lead on this project. If you're interested more in this project, because it is sort of a kind of an interesting story, we've published on it in Aurora's Journal. And also Charles, I think, did a talk online that you can find on their YouTube. But after that block documentation in 2022, we applied for some funding, and then again through Larry, brought a crew together to do a full documentation. Because although many people had visited at the site, they had done research on specific facets of the site, the BLM archaeologist had a pretty good documentation of it. It had never been officially recorded with a state documentation with the forms and the photos and all that kind of stuff. So we decided that the site deserved that kind of love and treatment. And so we also were fortunate, we brought in representatives from the Eastern Shoshone, the Northern Arapaho, and the Crow nations. And so it was just a really wonderful collaborative project. And then in 2023, Charles and I wrote another National Register of Historic Places nomination for the site. So this was, for me, just sort of a really sweet way to end my time in Wyoming. This was kind of the last big project I worked on there. And it just reinforced the idea that the more you go back to a site, the more time you spend at a site, the more you're going to find. That is true in the Lower Pecos. I've always felt that way. No matter how many times I go to a site, you're going to see something that you didn't see before. And it was the same at this Greybull South site. Even though there had been many illustrations of this site and documentations, because we were up there on ladders and looking in different lightings, we found lots more figures that were never known about. That was a lot of fun. But then it came time to leave Wyoming. So I think Davy Crockett said this, you keep your gorgeous summers and I will go to Texas, where winters are pretty nice, so I can't complain. And as you can see on the right, I'm pretty excited to also be fishing in the Pecos River. So as long as there's a river around, I'm okay about it. But yeah, we came back to Texas. I worked with Versar Global Solutions, which is a cultural resource management firm I was in their El Paso office. And we worked on many different projects, but the one I want to highlight today really briefly is one that we did at Waco Tank State Park and Historic Site. And if you've never been there, it is a magnificent site. It's known for bouldering and climbing, but also for really, really fabulous rock art. So Charles and I, my husband Charles and I, we embarked on a 4-year project to survey and document all four mountains at the park for rock imagery panels. And I guess we started in 2024. And so as of right now, the North Mountain survey is complete. That's the first mountain that we started with because it's open to the public for unguided tours. Before we started this project, there were 98 panels that were previously known and documented. And then after we finished the survey, we documented 161 new panels. And as you can see from these photos, a lot of these panels were in places such as this. We did every sort of scooch, crawl, crab walk that you could imagine because oftentimes the rock art panels were in locations that you think like, oh, no, it wouldn't be back there, but it was. And so that was really great. Of those 161 new panels, 138 of those panels had recognizable elements. So not just smudges or remnant paint. They had things that you could assign to perhaps a style type or a time period, whether it be zigzags or Jornada faces or Apache dancers. There were 35 new Jornada panels that we found, and this is a photo of one of them. For those of you, this is sort of a test. I wish I had like a poll button right now. If you could think of what this is. But for those of you with a keen eye, you might be able to see some sort of red coloration in here. And this is actually turned out to be a Jornada face or mask, which is what the Jornada rock art is really well known for. And so this project was just amazing. We're only done with year one of it so far. So expect lots more to come on that. Yeah, I think that's all I'm going to say about that. So what did I learn? I'm going to wrap this up. What did I learn in the last 6 years since the last time I was at Shumla? Well, for one, there's no place like home. I was born and raised in Texas. I make a lot of jokes about it, especially after I experienced beautiful Wyoming summers. But feeling like I could honestly get emotional if I talk about it too much. But going back to Comstock, being in Val Verde County feels like coming home. And it's not just the rock art that's unique and the archaeology that's unique and special, but it's also the people that surround Shumla, our partners, our supporters. I mean, it really is a special group. I'll stop with the sappiness now. But also I got to learn a lot of different recording methods. Shumla does things in a very specific way, and it works well with the context that we're in. And we've changed and developed through time and improved through time. But I really got to see, okay, in these different contexts, it really is necessary to do sort of an in-field illustration. Or in these contexts, you really need to use lighting or pole photography. So that was really good. And going along with that, I think working in new areas and with new people inevitably expands your mind to different ideas or perspectives, whether it be from working with Indigenous peoples or even just different archaeologists. It sort of was like a good reset. I think it's good for all archaeologists to put themselves out of their comfort zone and to learn new things from new people. And then finally, it really made me view Val Verde County and the Lower Pecos from a much broader perspective. And this is something I would like to continue to do moving forward. Val Verde County is big. It's really big. It's bigger. I think it's bigger than a couple states in New England, or at least similar size. And there's so much we can learn from just within Val Verde County. These are all these blue dots are the known rock art sites in Val Verde County. There's over 300 of them. So there's infinite amount of data to research and to study. But I think now that I've gone away for a bit, I also appreciate that without, we can do all these micro studies, but we also need to look at the macro scale and understand what's going on all surrounding Val Verde County. What does the rock art look like to the north of us, to the south of us? We know that Pecos River style goes into the Burros. How does that play into things? And so that's something that I really look forward to over the next several decades of research. It'll be a slow process, but I think we're up to the task. And so I think with that, I just thank you so much for joining. I'm really happy to take questions. I'll try to answer them the best I can. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was utterly fascinating. and so much I didn't know. So it was really, really fun to watch. And I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat. So I would invite anyone who would like to ask Amanda a question to please type a question in, or you can do your little hand raise to let me know you have a question. And I'm going to start because I have lots. Um, Green pigment. Green.
Mm,
Where does the green come from? How did they
yeah,
make that pigment?
that's a great question. Larry, do you want to chime in on that? Because honestly, I don't remember. I know that they did some PXRF testing to try to figure it out, but I don't remember if the results were conclusive. I don't know if Larry can type it into the chat or unmute. But it was a mineral-based paint, to my knowledge. It wasn't an organic-based paint.
Okay. Well, that's really fascinating. I mean, oh, it says Mike said green is copper, isn't it? Perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, it should be, but I don't know the specific minerals that might create that coloration.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's something I find really fascinating. The choice, with what they have available and then the choices they make within that to
Mhm.
use or not use different colors. So that's fascinating. All
Yeah.
right, we have some questions for you. Donna Piercy would like to know, could you briefly review what happened at Greybull? Um, they removed parts of it and your group did what? She said.
Yeah, no problem. So in the 60s, those blocks, they removed several blocks from the wall, and then those blocks sat in storage at the museum for 40 years, 50 years. And so in 2017, when those blocks were sort of rediscovered in storage, there was an effort that started to document those blocks so that we could try to virtually, digitally place them back in their spot on the wall, right? So by creating 3D models of the blocks and then also creating 3D models of the existing rock wall with the holes, you can at least digitally kind of put them back in place. But I mean, the fact of the matter is they aren't able to actually be put back in place. So there was an effort to document the blocks themselves, the removed blocks with the rock art on it. And then went to the site and did a full proper documentation of the site.
Al Dart would like to know, are you anticipating any new directions in yours or Shumla's research and methods?
I've been thinking about this a lot, obviously, because it's like I'm coming back. Honestly,
In your
right
3 weeks?
now, yeah, in my 3 weeks, I would say right now I have so much to learn from the current Shumla staff. I've never done a graphic database. I know what it is. I know the kind of like just behind it, but I've never actually done one. I've never done a Harris Matrix program before. And so what I would like to do is really come up to speed on some of those methods. And then I think for me right now, I don't necessarily see any major changes in methods because Shumla's worked for 15 years pretty consistently to improve, which we will make small improvements, no, undoubtedly. But I want us to just really take a hard look at the sites we did at Alexandria. We had made like a priority list of the most threatened sites and ones that we think have high research potential, and really figure out where do we need to spend our efforts to make the biggest impact over the next 5 years. And so, what else did he ask? There was methods. What else? Any new
Yeah, and
directions?
the research.
Yeah, and then I think eventually all of us are really keen to get into Mexico. That's a complicated project, but we have Dr. Diana Rolon, who is a Mexican archaeologist on our staff. I think we're really well positioned to start inching our way in that direction. But
So
yeah, I
much to
think
come.
yeah,
Yeah. We'll have her talk again after she's been here for 6 weeks.
yeah, yeah.
But yes, I mean, so many wonderful possibilities for new directions. So Joni Stern would like to know, did you feel like in the places that you were talking about, Wyoming and Waco tanks, these were individual pictures, or was it a cosmology like the Lower Pecos?
Yeah, good question. So this is part of that, working with new people, you get all kinds of just different perspectives on how different art is interpreted. There's no really simple answer for this question, but I can give examples of like I learned for the crow, they really see rock art in sort of two different perspectives or two different ways in which they were created and for what purposes. There's the ghost writing, which the Crow people say they didn't do. They know what it's talking about. It has a lot of stuff about their mythology and things, but they didn't do it. And then they have the human-made pictographs or petroglyphs that it's often more sort of the biographic style where they're recounting stories and events and things that happened. For Waco Tanks, Waco Tanks is sort of new for me, but I think very much so with these different face characters and masks, whatever you'd like to call them. I think it very much draws upon sort of similar, you're looking at different deities or different characters in the pantheon of their mythology. But I think working in these different places really opened my eyes to seeing all the kind of possibilities that could exist. Because think about the bear song dance scene. It looks like a bear with like a weird tree, but what it's really doing is documenting this ceremony that the Crow do every year. So it's in that way, it's certainly related to religion and cosmology and all of these really sacred things, but it's almost more of a documentation event. So if anything I've learned is that I don't really know a lot.
Well, and that actually segues perfectly into the next question, which is kind of about almost a new aspect of archaeology where we admit that we don't know everything and
Yeah.
that we have an open mind to what those possibilities may be and who may have that information.
Mhm.
JT asked in your work, for example, at Waco Tanks, can you describe your mindset, possibly clearing of your mind, that it takes to identify anthropomorphic features and things in the rock art?
Yeah. I mean, I think for one, it's practice. It's 15 years of looking at rock art. And now I have the fortune of having looked at rock art in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. Waco Tanks in particular was interesting because it was also unlike any other place I had been, where I will say that beyond de-stretch on your phone, our most important tool was a flashlight. There were certain panels that we could not see unless you were using external lighting in the locations that we were at. I mean, it was sort of like the bear of the wolves, where it had to be the perfect sun lighting. Although in these locations at Waco Tanks, you're crawling in different areas where the sun doesn't shine. And so I think it was also, I had to kind of unlearn in the Lower Pecos, it's these nice rock shelters or a nice overhang. Waco Tanks in particular, it wasn't like that. They could be in any nook and cranny or little Waco on the side of a boulder, which we found plenty of. And so, yeah, I think a lot of when you're going to work in new areas, but also when you're working in areas you've been in for a long time, you do have to sort of humble yourself and recognize that, like, just because it's always been this way or I've known it to be one way doesn't mean it can't exist and doesn't exist in another way.
Mhm.
I hope that answers your question. We also had to clear our mindsets from, like, are there rattlesnakes in here? I don't know, but we're going. So,
Oh my goodness. Kate Ritchie wants to know what will happen with the rest of the Waco Tanks documentation project. Will this be incorporated into your work at Shumla?
yeah, so I hope so. I mean, we're working out, so it's a 4-year project with TPWD, and Versar is the CRM company that won the project, and Charles and I were working there at the time. But Versar really wants us to continue on it if we can. So Charles is now starting as assistant professor at UT Austin, and so he'll be able to incorporate that into his research and work, and then I hope to be able to as well with Shumla. Charles will probably have to take on more of the work, but I can at least help with the survey and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Peggy Skiles is asking, when I visited Waco Tanks probably 15 years ago, they wouldn't tell me where the rock art sites were because of so much vandalism. Is
Mm.
that still true, or would tourists now be able to see some of the rock art?
Yeah, so they have a couple maps that have known locations of sites that you can go to and visit, but certainly many of them you just would have to sort of stumble upon as you explore the rock. I will say Waco Tanks has done really good work in terms of getting the word out about vandalism and the effects of it. And even the climbing community, the bouldering community is very protective of the rock art and making sure that they're not damaging things as well as they make new routes and stuff. And I think that was part of why they wanted this survey done, is to be able to allow people to enjoy the space to the fullest, and maybe create new bouldering routes and whatnot. We wanted to make sure that we had a really good feeling for where other sites may be. I have no doubt that we missed stuff. I mean, 161 new panels, and I'm sure if we went there at a different time of the year, we maybe could have found another 30. I don't know, but um, but yes, you can. They do have some of them marked, but others of them. I mean, there's hundreds that are out there that you just would have to kind of stumble upon.
Yeah. Callan asked, are you going to continue your research into bedrock mortar holes?
I would love to. Yeah, actually, the Shumla crew will probably get sick of me like constantly getting sidetracked by these holes in the rocket sites. I would like to. It'll have to be sort of like a pet project in my off time for now. I'm still looking at, like, I really want to do experiments and stuff, creating my own and processing different foods, fermenting different foods. So anyway, if anyone's interested, I
Yeah,
could do
yeah, right. Well, that's awesome. Well, we are reaching the end of our hour together. And thank you so much, Amanda, for this. I mean, it was just fantastic to see. I knew all the places you'd been, but it was wonderful to see the different rock art. The thing that stood out to me the most was the bracelets on the bears.
that.
Things like that. I can completely see how you would have been standing there like, I
Where have
am
I seen this
miles
before? Yeah.
from where I've seen this last.
Yeah.
So much to learn. So much to learn. It was just wonderful. Thank you everybody for joining us. You'll receive an email with a link to this if you want to hear anything again. And please fill out your survey about the program, and we will see you at the next Lunch and Learn.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.